Today, let's go over what kinds of dystopian, magical things that have happened in China in the past week. Well, apparently the latest one is that earlier yesterday, the foreign minister Wang Yi announced that China has forgiven 23 debts from 17 countries in Africa. Well, I don't know exactly how much that's going to be. I do know China is not in the best economic shape to pull this kind of stunt because of its own banking crisis and mortgage crisis, just overall real estate market situation. In terms of how bad that has gotten, I've been seeing more and more mainstream Western media talking about it, including even bigger YouTubers in the finance world, such as even Graham Stephan, who is just a guy that does reaction videos to American millennials on how they spend their money in a week. Even he is talking about how bad China's economic collapse might be in several videos, that China is still the second largest economy in the world, and a lot of China's GDP is from the real estate market, and if it collapses, it will for sure affect the rest of the world, including you and me, who are not living in China, and your investment portfolio and also your retirement might get hit. We don't know what might happen, but we do know it's going to be very serious. But just at this very critical moment, China still decides to hold on to its face for its dear life. And I mean, I can understand it to an extent because we all know that these countries in Africa are never going to pay these debts back, because these were debt traps to begin with. These projects don't really benefit the local economic growth because they were not put in place because of natural demands from the local markets, but just simply because of politics, because our current leader, great leader, wants to look good. He wants to create something for himself in his political career. And that's why they built the Belt and Road Initiative. And for example, they sponsored all these projects to build really modern, lavish government buildings in places like Sri Lanka. And apparently everyday poor citizen is not going to enjoy that, and therefore that kind of project is not going to generate too much revenue to help boost the local economy. And actually, people from these countries that China has claimed to support don't really see these projects too fondly, because a lot of these Chinese projects, they only use Chinese workers. They don't hire locals, and also they are very exploitative to the local environments and also to the local labor market. You can find a ton of documentaries on YouTube just speaking on just how bad it is getting in Africa, and a lot of Chinese workers, they would even violate the local woman without actually marrying them or staying for the kids. So I mean, there are exceptions to the rules. Of course, there are good people and bad people everywhere, but there is a big proportion of bad people in this case. That's that. And another thought that came to my mind when I saw this news is this Chinese saying, 宁赠友邦不与家奴. 宁赠友邦 means rather giving gifts to friendly foreign countries. And 不与家奴 means then giving anything to your home slaves or your domestic slaves, which are Chinese people. We kind of jokingly call ourselves 韭菜, 中国韭菜, Chinese chives or Chinese leeks, however you translate it, because leeks or chives are these types of vegetables that you can just harvest, and if you keep harvesting, it'll just keep growing back, kind of like Chinese people, the relation between the Chinese people and the Chinese government. So we call ourselves Chinese chives. As you can see, if you are an unfortunate chive that has bought one of these really bad housing projects that never got finished, and yet you have to pay for a mortgage every single month, if you get behind, you'll for too long, you will get on that blacklist of creditless people, and you will lose your access to the high-speed train, even regular trains, and then you will not be able to take airplane, get your passport, and just do regular everyday things, activities. So people are just furious, and they still have to pay for their mortgage when China just decided to waive all the debts from these African countries that will never be able to pay it back. So clearly, see, this Chinese saying just makes perfect sense. 宁增友邦，不与家奴. Great, perfect. Warms my heart. That being said, I still don't understand people who, whether they are Chinese, who have lived abroad, or people who were born and raised in free countries, that the CCP has lifted the Chinese people out of poverty, and that the CCP was the reason why China has made so much progress in its own economic growth in the past few decades. I mean, just one question. Why was China so poor to begin with? Who put China in poverty to begin with? I mean, you could say colonialism or the invasion of the Imperial Japan, but wasn't that the 国民党, the nationalist Chinese? The CCP was not the government that got affected by colonialism and Imperial Japan. Maybe towards the end when the Civil War broke out, but it was the CCP with its stupid policies from Mao Zedong that put Chinese people in such disadvantaged starting point compared to the rest of the world. I mean, Japan was bombed by America twice, and yet it was still able to become one of the wealthiest country in the world. China was struggling with great famine when the other countries in the world were having breakthroughs in so many different fields, left, right, and center. It was all because of Mao's ego. He wants to compete with the West. He wants to compete with the Soviet Union. Oh, we're going to 赶英超美. We're going to catch up with the British and surpass the Americans. And we're going to be so much better than them. So instead of letting farmers decide what to grow each year and also when to grow crops, we're going to just bring in people from the city who had no knowledge on farming whatsoever and make them meet the quota that we arbitrarily decide just because we feel like it. Heck it, we're politicians and we're leaders of the country, so we know the best. We know the best because we care for the people. That's why the Chinese people had to be set so much back compared to the rest of the world, because the government was getting in the way of China's economic growth. And then when Mao died and the other people in the party saw how that was not sustainable, so they decided to step back and open up China to the world. And then finally they joined WTO. Finally, that was the official kickstart of China's economic growth. It was that Chinese people were finally allowed to do what they want to do with their life and what they're good at. So that's how China got to become better. And that's why China just has always seen Taiwan as this threat, not because of jealousy per se, honestly. I don't think it's jealousy, quite frankly. It was mostly because Taiwan is basically a counter-argument to China's narrative, to the CCP's narratives that China cannot get ahead without the CCP's leadership. Well, if you look at Taiwan, it started off pretty similar to China. It was pretty poor to begin with, yet it didn't have the CCP's leadership. It still got to lift itself out of poverty as well, and people are doing really well for themselves, and they're not the wealthiest country in the world, but they sure have a really good medical system. And if you get sick in Taiwan, you're pretty much covered, and nobody can deny that Taiwan has a very nice medical system. I think it's 健保系统. I forgot its name in Chinese, but I've heard a lot of good things about that, and that's why I just cannot wrap my head around the fact that there are still so many people, grown-ass adults, who buy into the CCP's lies that it is the reason why China has become wealthy. Again, like I said so many times, being a wealthy nation and having a nation of strong individuals is not the ultimate goal the Chinese government has in mind. And quite frankly, I don't think that's the end goal for all government. But at least in other systems, the government can be kept in check. And it has to set that as their goal if they want to remain in power. But in China's case, it really doesn't have any incentives. The only incentive is that the more money they get, the more power they can have, and the more they can just squander that money to accomplish any sort of utopian vision they have in mind. There's a lot more goes into that, but I think this is what it boils down to fulfill their ego and to prevent themselves getting revenged by their opponents. And now, even though the Chinese people don't want to stop working, they don't want to get tested every day, every other day. They don't want their fish to get tested. Yeah, there was a circulating viral video where a fish was getting tested for COVID, and it was just getting really hilarious and ridiculous. But yeah, people don't want that to happen in China, but it is the will of the government. It was from a top-down system. It's an order coming down from the top, and that's why everyone has to follow. And it's not going to change until we realize that CCP is not the answer, and this top-down system is not the answer. But again, there are still so many, even Chinese people, who are used to this, getting this Stockholm syndrome, who has to have a dictator ruling over them, who claims that they know better. And this makes them feel safe, I guess. And I understand cognitive dissonance is really hard to overcome. But at some point, we have to do that level of self-introspection and kind of learning how to challenge ourselves to see outside of our information bubble and understand that it is a matter of people's livelihood. It is the matter of our future, our kids' future. It's something bigger than what it seems. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on this matter. And I look forward to reading them in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon in the next video. Take care.